Hello. I should probably change my name here. Good evening. It's 6:10. For those of you on the call, feel free to unmute yourself at any point. The point of these informational sessions are for them to be, as informal as possible. Really to, allow for residents to ask any types of questions, feel comfortable having an open discussion. There's no, agenda. I have a slideshow I go through just to keep things moving along. But like I said, feel free to unmute yourself at any point, or write something in the chat. I'm happy to go through any of the items. If you watched the recording or participated in last Monday's session, you know that my slideshow doesn't cover every single article, but I'm happy to go through any article that's on the warrant. I just tried to, keep it at some of the, the larger topics. And as I said, happy to go through, happy to answer any questions throughout the, at any point during the presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to start my slideshow here. All right, so annual town meeting this year is this Saturday, May 20th at 12:30 at the Nahant Town Hall. Check-in starts at 11 a.m. on Saturday. Friday from 10 a.m. to noon, I will host some office hours for anyone that wants to stop by the town hall and discuss anything related to town meeting. I'll be here, open office hours, especially anyone, uncomfortable with speaking in a, in a public setting like this. You can just stop by the town hall and I'm happy to go, walk through some of your questions or comments or, walk through the warrant with you one-on-one. The process of preparing for annual town meeting starts back in December. From since December till this weekend, there are a number of people involved in this process. From in the staff level, it's myself, our accountant, all our department heads. From a volunteer level, it's the Board of Selectmen, the Community Preservation Committee, the Finance Committee, any other committees that might have requests or interests with items that are on the warrant. There's, it probably averages about 3 night meetings a week for 2 or 3 months. So there's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, a lot of process involved in it. In January, citizen petitions and committee requests for warrant articles are due by January 31st. That's per the town charter. There actually is a citizen petition on this year's warrant that was submitted timely with the right amount of signatures. It's related to short-term rentals, and I'll get into that later in the presentation. All committee requests are due by January 31st. And You should know that the warrant is, the Board of Selectmen are responsible for the warrant. So they control what articles get added to the warrant, unless an article is added by, through citizens petition. So the budget that you vote on at town meeting, Article 6, the omnibus budget, that is actually the Finance Committee's document. So we put together a budget, we submit it to the Finance Committee, they review it, they have their own meetings with department heads, reviewing requests, reviewing community preservation requests, reviewing any types of committee requests for capital items. And then the final draft of the budget that gets added, to the for town meeting to be voted on is actually the FinCom's document. And then in May, which you should have already received, the report and recommendations of the Finance Committee gets delivered to every household of each registered voter in Nahant. If you go to nahant.org and click on town meeting information, you'll find a copy of that report and recommendation of the Finance Committee. You'll find information from CPC, any other backup information related to articles, a whole host of information. And also, it's kind of broken down nicely to show you the process, like this slide does, of what we go through to get ready for town meeting. So I want to talk, one of the probably the most important piece of the of every town meeting is the omnibus budget. And I wanted to kind of just explain to folks how we come up with the budget. I think it's important that you as residents understand, the priorities of the town, and, that the finances are in good standing. So we first look at the town accountant and finance director and myself, start looking at what our revenues are going to be for the upcoming fiscal year. So the omnibus budget that you vote on at town meeting is what the town is allowed to spend starting July 1 of 2023 until June 30th of 2024. And it's all that money that we spend in that fiscal year is also created through the revenues for that fiscal year. So it's not like the revenues we bring in this year is what we can spend next year. We have to estimate what our revenues are going to be for the upcoming year. We have to make sure we estimate those appropriately. And that's what tells us how much money we're going to be able to spend for the upcoming year as well. So first thing we do is, what are those revenues next year going to look like? We try to estimate them, conservatively and safely. And oh, did you have a question? Hold on, let me put this on mute here. Bruce.
Did you get this?
I got the things.
Okay, here we go. So we look at what our revenues are going to be for the upcoming year. Then we start talking to our department heads and committees about what their budget requests are going to be and what their capital requests are going to be. And we start prioritizing those, taking a look at, where they fall in line with our 5-year plan and things of that nature, and determine, what the urgency is of those requests. And then we start putting our budget together. We start by funding our priorities at their minimum. So, we look at debt service payments. How much debt are we going to owe in the upcoming year? And we'll start by, funding that amount in our budget. Then we have a commitment with the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen to fund our stabilization account, which is basically like a rainy day fund, requires 2/3 vote to pull money out of it. And it rolls from year to year. I believe we have a commitment to fund at least, I think, $100,000 or $125,000 a year into stabilization. So we start by putting that number in. Other post-employment benefits. This is the benefits associated with retired employees. This is another reserve fund. We have a commitment to put $25,000 into that account every year. We look at our contractual obligations. What are our union contracts, our employee contracts, service contracts? What are those costs going to be? We fund those at what they're required. We estimate what that's going to cost us for the upcoming year, and we fund that at that level. We look at our assessments. What do we owe, say, Swampscott for school? What do we owe MWRA for water, or Lynn Water Sewer for sewer? What are we going to need? How much are we going to owe this upcoming year? We fund that. So we build the budget with the minimums of each of those items. Then we look at how much we have left and look at what the requests that are coming in at. And we decide based on the types of requests, if they're going to be funded with free cash, or if they're going to be funded with our most confident revenue stream, which is usually like our local receipts, our tax revenue, things of that nature. It's really important because free cash is almost like it's what I like to refer to it as a Christmas bonus. You might get a $1,000 bonus from your job at the end of a year, and you're going to take that $1,000 and you're going to buy something with it, or you're going to put it into savings or pay down some debt, but you're not going to buy something that's going to cost you $1,000 a year for the next 5 years, because you only have $1,000 from that Christmas bonus. You don't know if you're going to get the Christmas bonus again next year. So you don't want to make an investment with that type of long-term commitment, because your revenue stream is stagnant. It's one time. So what we use free cash for is those one-time capital investments, funding our stabilization and our OPEB, our revenue, our retained, excuse me, our reserve funds, and paying down our debt service. We don't pay employee costs with free cash. That's going to come from a different bucket of revenue. And it's really important that you're using all of these things that we're doing impact the town's bond rating, which is very similar to your credit score. So when you go to borrow money to buy a house, to buy a car, whatever it might be, they're going to run your credit score, and that credit score is going to give them, whoever you're financing from, some sort of idea of how dependable you are, and it's going to impact the interest rate of your borrowing. The town's bond rating is the same principle. So how much money are we paying down in debt every year? How much money do we have in our reserves? What's our revenue stream like? What are our commitments like? All those, are we using our one-time free cash money appropriately? All those things come into play and impact your town's bond rating. Now, we have the best bond rating that we could possibly have for our size budget. It's in great standing. A lot of these priorities were presented to us from a finance report by the Division of Local Services at the Department of Revenue back in, I think, 2015. So we're doing a lot of these things the right way. You should feel comfortable that the budget is healthy. It's limited in growth, and the important things are being funded. So when we, look at all those principles, there's a lot of words on this slide. So again, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt with any questions. Keep in mind that those principles I just talked about, that guide that we follow when we build our budget, this is the result of it in FY24. Minimal increases in our operational budget. Only $357,000 increase in total. Our general government category is only increased about 3%. Public safety has gone up 4.6%. School 3.8%. Public works 7.3%. But again, that 7.3, 7.3 sounds like a lot, but it's actually only $36,000 compared to a 3.1% increase in general government, which is about $48,000. So culture and recreation saw a little bit of a decrease, mostly because of military housing becoming vacant and the town's effort to sell them. We aren't anticipating the need to pay for property management fees at the same level that we have in the past, or if at all. And our water and sewer enterprise has gone down again. And actually, I'm happy to say that for the second year in a row, our sewer rate is not going to increase at all. So for the second year in a row, your sewer rate is level funded. It's level, it hasn't increased at all. So you're not going to have a change in your rate. Rubbish enterprise, we see an increase there. Rates seem to be going up. Our waste management contract and honestly, the cost of recycling and household waste is increased nationally, if not globally. So the costs are just constantly going up. We're seeing a 4% increase in our service costs on an annual basis, which is actually on the lower side compared to other communities of our size. But still, it's significant. So after town meeting, we'll be having some public meetings discussing next steps with our trash and seeing how we can potentially make it more palatable for our residents and maybe reduce those costs a bit. As I mentioned before, appropriately using free cash, we have $992,935 in free cash this year, and 100% of it is being used for one-time expenditures, funding capital projects, or replenishing other reserves. I talked about free cash on the last slide about how it's similar to like a one-time Christmas bonus. What it truly is, it's the combination of it's a formula that's the combination of money you appropriated that you didn't end up spending and revenues that you brought in that you didn't predict. So if we say we estimate we're going to bring in $15 million in revenues the upcoming year, and we end up bringing in $16 million in revenues, that means an extra $1 million that would go towards free cash. It's not ever really that much. Or if we said we're going to spend $15 million next year and we only spend $14 million, there's $1 million in savings there that would drop to free cash. So that's how that works. And it's really not available to us because town meeting's in May. That calculation is done in June. It's not going to be available to you until the following fiscal year, which you're not. So it's almost like a 2-year rollover because you're in FY23 today. We're going to be voting on FY24 this weekend, and the money that gets certified for free cash in June is going to be available for FY25. So it's almost like a 2-year rollover. Continuing to fund reserve accounts, improving the town's bond rating. I talked a little bit about that. We'll be putting $200,000 into the stabilization account this year, and if that's approved, our fund will be close to $900,000. And when I first started in 2018, it was only about 100 grand was in there. So it's grown rapidly, and we hope to continue to fund that. You really want that stabilization account to be around 5% minimum of your, 5% of your total budget at a minimum. 10% is ideal. And for a $15 million budget, we're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. OPEB, we'll put another $25,000 in that. It'll be, the balance will be up to $510,000. Again, when in 2018, when we first committed to these principles, that account was only around $3,000 balance. So it's grown exponentially, and we're going to continue to fund it $25,000 a year, if not more, if we can. And paying down debt. This is a very important one, because there's two different ways to borrow as a municipality. You can borrow, there's more than two, but I'll keep it simple. You have short-term debt and long-term debt. Long-term debt is going to come with higher interest rates, which means cost the town more money over the length of time that you're doing that borrowing. If you do short-term borrowing and you're able to pay off those loans in a quicker fashion and prevent them from going into a long-term borrowing, you end up getting cheaper interest rates, and you're saving the town a ton of money. That's why we look at what do we owe at a minimum, which this year in FY24, our total debt appropriation, we actually are funding it $654,000 above what our minimum amount is due. Originally, we start with the minimum amount, and then we go through all the capital requests, all the different items that we're trying to do, and we see if we have any extra free cash or retained earnings, and then we'll take that money, if we have extra that we can use to pay down debt, prevent long-term borrowing, we will. And that's what we're doing this year again. And we're going to end up producing a lot of savings by paying off that debt in the upcoming year. I want to just go through some of the, I want to highlight some of the articles that are on the warrant capital requests. So Article 16, the Council on Aging kitchen, the current kitchen here in the town hall, it serves about 30 plus or minus 5 seniors every day, every week, 5 days a week. I'm sorry, Monday through Friday. And it is dated. It's old, it's tired, it really needs to be repaired. We've been working on making repairs to this kitchen for a couple years now. We have an architect, an engineer on already in place. They've estimated the cost of the new material and the project cost, excuse me. And we estimate we need another $50,000 in order to get this project going. We received $50,000 from the Community Preservation Act. We have $50,000 from a Mass State Budget grant, and there's $13,000 in the Friends of the Council on Aging. So with this other 50 from this year's town meeting, we'll be at $163,000, which is should be enough to, redo this commercial grade kitchen in a historical building and do it appropriately to code, and make sure we have a safe use for the kitchen here in the town hall.
A question about that, the kitchen.
Yes.
When you say commercial grade, so you mean the town in theory could rent it out to small businesses?
Yes, thank you, Brendan. So we've talked about that. Community kitchens are becoming kind of a popular thing, and we have a lot of professional bakers and chefs in town that, don't have a commercial grade, public health certified kitchen at home, which prevents them from selling goods out of their kitchen. If we are able to complete this project, we've talked to the Council on Aging about in the afternoons and on the weekends, renting the space out for that type of use, like a community kitchen type use. So yeah, it's something that we might be able to do in the future.
Is it also something like, I know there's this whole separate issue of the short-term rentals, and I know people try to sell experience packages. Is there any way we could leverage this so that someone, in a sense, has people who want like a New England excursion, they get some bed and breakfasts here in town, and then they do like a New England cooking class?
It's possible that, if someone who meets the qualifications wanted to rent the space to put on some sort of event, yeah, it's possible that we could do something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being on. The next article I wanted to highlight is a pretty large capital investment in two of our large dump trucks here in the town. We use these dump trucks primarily for water and sewer utility work. And they're also critical assets with snow and ice removal. They are due for replacement. And the new trucks are getting two new trucks are going to be, it's going to be expensive, and it's going to take some time because they only produce, a limited number of these trucks a year. So we've already, because they've been kept up, in pretty good shape, but are due for replacement. They actually have some pretty decent trade-in value, which is going to help reduce the cost of the new trucks to about $300,000, where I think it would be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 if we didn't have these trade-in value. And you can see we are only asking for $150,000 to use for this capital purchase, where we're going to take that 150 from our sewer retained earnings. The other 150 we're actually going to utilize ARPA funds for. So by combining 150 from free cash type funding source and 150 from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, we're going to be able to replace these, huge assets and expensive assets without any borrowing or, need to pay for interest at all. To the, adding any debt burden to the taxpayers. So the timing of this is really works out in our favor. And it's, towns are very rarely in a position to be able to make this type of purchase without having to borrow. So we have to spend the ARPA funds down by, I believe, December of 2025. I'll have to double check that date. We have to spend it down anyways, and we have $150,000 in retained earnings that we could spend towards this capital. So it's a good use of the funds, and it's going to save the town money over time compared to borrowing for it. Excuse me. Community preservation, always a very always a big article, number of sub-articles within Article 21. They've received a number of great applications from residents and nonprofit groups and the town this year back in January. This is a list of all of them. Just want to highlight a few of them. Flash Road Pickleball Court. This is the basketball and tennis courts at Flash Road that were recently refinished, adding pickleball lines to the tennis court so that it can be a dual use facility. It includes some sunscreens and windscreens and lighting and nets and other items, as well as, repainting the court to include the pickleball lines. The Article 21 D, Fort Ruckman Bailey's Hill restoration. If you haven't been down to Fort Ruckman or Bailey's Hill, I encourage you to do so. We've done a lot of work with previous CPC funding to remove invasive species and renourish the area, bring back the trails. So these funds are going to help us, with some new plantings, native vegetation, non-invasive plants, and potentially signage as well. But there's already a ton of progress that has been made. And this is to really continue that process. And the entire area looks really, really good. Both the Fort Ruckman side across from Ocean View. And if you go to Bailey's Hill, there's the trail system within Bailey's Hill has been cleaned up. A lot of those, invasive species and dead trees have been pulled out of there, and it's quite enjoyable already, but more work to be done. Lodge Park East Point Restoration 21E. There was a professional consultant was hired with CPC funds approved at last year's town meeting to come in, look at East Point Lodge Park, and conduct an assessment and provide recommendations for plantings, removal of invasive species, a lot of the similar work that we're doing at Bailey's Hill. And so the recommendations through that report are the basis of this application that came through. That's what that $29,000 is for, to make improvements at Lodge Park based on that report. 21F, Kelly Green street plantings and pedestrian bridges, $50,000. The town submitted for this one. It's replanting trees at Kelly Green's golf course, not only for player safety, but abutter safety. It provides shade. It's a great, trees provide such a value to the stormwater system and the ecosystem. And not only that, but we're also going to be hoping to rebuild or some pedestrian bridges like the one over Bear Pond. And with the lowlands study that we conducted last year regarding stormwater improvements, one of the recommendations was to restore the open ditch system that goes along the 6th hole and cuts across under the 5th and over to Bear Pond, and and if we were to do that, we'd have to install pedestrian bridges. So if approved, we'll have the funds to do so with that article. 21G, town rights of ways, also a town application. This is funding to do title research on the rights of ways around Big Nahant. It's all part of the town's effort to restore and educate the public on where the rights of ways exist, and deal with any types of encroachments that we may have in our town. And really, the first step, phase 1, is title research. We've already done a lot of that phase in Little Nahant on the coastal rights of ways, as well as some on-site surveying. But we haven't really completed as much on Big Nahant. So that's what this funding will help us get through some title research on the right of ways in Big Nahant. Excuse me, for having a raspy voice. Article 23 is feeding wildlife amendment to our police bylaws. The town has some bylaws related to trash and how you maintain your trash and your trash receptacles and dumpsters, and really aimed at preventing unintentional wildlife feeding. And a lot of that has to do with rodents. In the last few years, as I'm sure everyone's aware, we've had, a lot of coyote issues as well. And, trying to eliminate food sources is a huge part of the town's responsibility in dealing with wildlife such as coyotes or rodents. So this amendment, and you can find the language on nahant.org, is going to provide the town the ability to, cite a resident or a non-resident who are intentionally or unintentionally feeding wildlife, causing a problem for our residents, and hopefully give us the ability to, remove that food source and prevent potential conflicts in the future. This is my last slide here. Article. So the biggest topic, I think, of discussion at town meeting is going to be related to short-term rentals. Article 24 and 25, both are regarding the regulation of short-term rentals. Things to know: Article 24 is sponsored by the Short-Term Rental Committee, which was created by a previous town meeting to develop a bylaw to be presented at a future town meeting related to short-term rentals. And then Article 25 is the citizens petition. You'll see that in your book, in the warrant, Article 24 is a summary article in the warrant. All the language associated to that came from the committee is in an appendix. Article 25, because it's a citizens petition, by law, we have to put the entirety of that petition right onto the warrant. So we couldn't do a summary article. So the entire language is right there. Both have both articles impact zoning and have a zoning amendment, zoning bylaw amendment included within them. So there was, which triggered a planning board hearing process and recommendation process, which is also in your book. Currently, the town does not have any zoning or general bylaws specific to short-term rentals. And the state law allows municipalities to regulate short-term rentals, but it doesn't allow us to prohibit them. So what both these articles are attempting to do is to provide the town the ability to regulate those short-term rentals. Both articles limit the total number of short-term rentals to 4% of Nahant housing units, which would be 64 based on the current total number of housing units in our town. The two major differences between Article 24 and 25 short-term rentals apply for a special use permit through the ZBA. And owner-occupied and owner-adjacent short-term rentals are allowed as of right. Whereas Article 25 proposes that all short-term rentals, not owner-occupied, owner-occupied, and owner-adjacent, are allowed as of right. both articles still require that all short-term rentals have a license with the state and a local license with the town. The big difference is that Article 24 adds an extra step in the process for non-owner occupied to go for a special permit through the ZBA process. Article 24, this is another key difference, the short-term rental committee article. It sets a framework for the licensing regulations at the local level, but it allows the Board of Selectmen, as the licensing authority, to promulgate rules and regulations related to short-term rentals. So it'll say that the Board of Selectmen have to come up with rules and regulations related to parking, related to noise, related to process, establish fees. And it kind of gives like the framework of it, but then it allows the Board of Selectmen through regulation to get specific. Excuse me again. Article 25 really does, it gets specific on those rules and regulations as part of their general bylaw amendment. A lot of good proposals included in both. Obviously, you know, it's harder to change rules and regulations in the future if they are in bylaw versus if they're in regulation form, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. I think the committee sense really was that, you know, let's get something on the books and kind of allow for us to come up with this process. And if we need to make changes, it'll be easy to do so. It's kind of a new situation that we're embarking on. It's been popular, it's been occurring in town, but it's really increased in the last couple of years. So it's giving us the ability to kind of learn as we go and make changes if needed. Again, both those articles are available in the book and on nahant.org. Brendan, go ahead. Give me a second. Take a glass of
So a
water.
question about the, so it says it limits it to 4%. Now, what if someone goes over, what measures does the town have available to punish people who are exceeding that?
I missed the first part of your
So,
question.
it says it's limited to 4% of the housing units. So it's saying 64 housing units in Nahant can be used for short-term rental. If you find that there's 70 units operating in town, is there mechanisms for the town to take action and reduce that number?
Yes, so you would, as a short-term rental, you have to be licensed with the state, and should one of these articles passes, you're going to have to get licensed with the town as well. But there's only going to be so many licenses that the town is going to give out.
So it's first come, first serve. So whoever gets the first 64 has, in a sense, a monopoly.
It's an annual basis, though. So if you have, you'll have almost like a rotation, natural rotation anyways, but certainly if there's any issues with hosts not abiding by the rules and regulations, they have to be inspected. So there's a number of different things that could, I guess, cause for relicensing to be a problem.
Well, I guess I'm wondering is like, you know, I don't see a mechanism that can prevent someone from owning all 64 units.
There isn't a cap on the number of hosts. It's just a cap on the number of units.
So if someone buys up all 64 this year, does that mean they still have all 64 next year and going forward?
You mean if somebody were to come to the town to get 64 individual licenses?
Yeah, because I guess the fear is that, you know, someone could lock these down and then they have them for the next decade. And so that, you know, there is no turnover in who can actually operate these. It's just the same small collective.
So I think that type of concern would be ironed out in the process of developing the regulations and what and those regulations are going to speak to what the process is of getting a license. So it's possible that those regulations could speak to that issue. I think that I don't think it's likely that one person's gonna come in for 64 licenses. But what the committee's main concern is, or what these rules and regulations are really concerned about, is the host and making sure that you have good hosts that understand the concerns and priorities of the residents of the town. So having one host that is very good at what they do and they're meeting all the rules and regulations of the town and they're not causing there's no issues with residents and parking and noise and trash and all that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually probably would be an easier way to manage the process. But understanding the point that you're making about having it open and fair to the whoever may own a unit in the town. I think that element of that element would be ironed out in the development of the regulations.
Okay. I guess my only follow-up question is, I know it's saying like it's a percentage of housing units. So I know on a separate track, the town's talking about affordable housing and potentially adding affordable housing units to the town. So I guess that 4% number is then going to change at some point in the future. I guess, do we have is zoning wise, do we have the ability, are these separate zoning items? Do we then have to, I guess, a lot more spaces in town to zone these additional units, or do they just automatically get zoned if the number of housing units increase?
It's not really a zoning element. It's a limit on the number of licenses that the town can give out on an annual basis.
Okay.
So that's why if 4% equals 64 units today, and a year from now it equals 70 units, excuse me, the regulations might go a little bit deeper and say 64. So even if 4% ends up becoming a larger number, the regulations may cap it at 64. So what as far as the short-term rental committee was attempting to do was really kind of set the boundary of how many, max licenses could be provided on an annual basis. And they did it on a percentage basis. So it gives the selectmen some ability to grow if so desired, if possible, but it also allows the selectmen through the promulgation of their regs to, their regulations could say, we're only going to do 50 licenses this year, as long as they're not going above 4%.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. If anybody else has any questions, please unmute yourself and ask them now. There's a comment in the chat that just says not resident. Not resident. If you want to unmute, you can, But it says an Airbnb host is required to have a minimum number of rentals in order to hold their status with the platforms. I'm not sure. Oh, okay, so it's saying if you're registered as a short-term rental and you're using Airbnb to publicize the rental, you have to have a minimum number of rentals a year in order to maintain your status with Airbnb. So you can't just it's probably a comment based on Brendan's question was, you can't just come in and, grab a bunch of licenses and not utilize them. If you don't rent, you won't be able, Airbnb is not going to allow you to use their website. So I guess there's a different carrot there that ensures fairness.
Well, actually, my concern was more that someone could lock it up, that they could buy it all up. They could, Nahant is a very pretty place. We can, someone can definitely advertise and fill places. And if there's no turnover in who is managing the properties, then residents who have the ability to potentially host may lose out on that kind of income source that could be helpful for them to sustain their homes.
It's a fair comment. Like I said, Brendan, I think it'll work itself out through the development of the regulations. I'm sorry, again, I want to apologize for my voice. It's just obviously during a public session, it's gonna act up on me, but I think that's something that will work itself out during the regulations, those types of concerns. I don't know how realistic it would be that, one person would come in and take all the licenses, but certainly there could be some sort of regulation in place that would prevent something like that from happening. If it was a legitimate concern. If no one else has any comments, questions, I want to thank you for joining the meeting tonight. And like I said, I'll have open office hours on Friday from 10 to 12 in the town hall for anyone that wants to stop in and chat about items on the warrant. And we also have a Board of Selectmen meeting Wednesday night, so there's a citizens forum there if anybody wants to speak up at that time.
Thank you, Tony. This is really helpful. This is Vi Paddock. Thank you so
Hi,
much.
Ryan. Thank you. Thank you.
Feel better.
Thanks. If my luck, I'll lose my voice on Friday.
Chicken soup. That's all you need.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.